everyone. I wanted to come on and share something a bit different with you today, and this is about Japan. Now, many of you may be aware that there's a Japanese manga artist called Ryo Tatsuki, who, because this has gone viral, she's predicted things that have been absolutely spot on in terms of how they manifested. For instance, she predicted many years before that there would be a huge natural disaster in March 2011. And she's Japanese, remember, so of course on the 11th of March 2011 we had Fukushima, and I'm going to be showing you the chart for that. She also, way back in 1999, and this is the prophecy that's really gone viral recently, to the extent that tourism to Japan is way down. She predicted that in July 2025, she did this in 1999, so 26 years before, that there would be a major tsunami that would involve an underwater rift between Japan and the Philippines that would result in a huge tsunami and much disruption. In a dream, she saw the date 5th of July 2025, and that's clearly come and gone. But subsequently, back in, I think, 2021, she'd already edited that to say that July was just the beginning of whatever this was, this unfolding, this event was. So what I want to say right up front is I'm not predicting anything here. I'm not predicting anything. Maybe she'll be right in this instance. Maybe she won't. She has been very accurate in the past. She also predicted, very sadly, Freddie Mercury's death as well, accurately. Great singer. So the way this has evolved, the reason I'm doing this is my very good friend Heather Ensworth, American astrologer, a few days ago had sent me some brilliant insights around a chart for Japan, which was dated 1457. And she'd also sent those insights to geophysicist Stefan Burns. So Heather and I went back and forwards on some thoughts, because I was actually looking at a different chart for Japan, which I'm going to be sharing with you in this video. Anyway, Stefan was talking yesterday about the very big earthquake in Alaska that happened on the 16th, I believe, a 7.3, and that was the principal content of his video. But in the last 10 minutes or so, he actually shared the chart that Heather had sent him and discussed that in some detail with her insight. So I'm putting Stefan's video below, so rather than me repeating everything that he said here and that Heather said, you can just go and look at the video, and even just look at that last section in the video if you want to see what Heather was talking about. So what I'm going to be sharing with you is, I'm going to be sharing three charts with you. The chart for Fukushima, the chart for Japan, which I have sourced, and a development of that as of the new moon in Leo coming up on in Japan time. It'll be the 25th of July. Now, the source for all of the charts I use in mundane, which doesn't mean dull and boring, in fact it's jolly interesting, global astrology, is this absolute Bible. And if you're serious about astrology, I very much recommend you get this. It's almost 700 pages. It's an absolute tome called The Book of World Horoscopes. And this has horoscopes of pretty much every country in, major events, big institutions like NATO and the UN, and all kinds of things. He is Dr. Nicholas Campion, and he was actually one of my tutors at the Faculty of Astrological Studies many, many years ago, because he has he originally got a BA, Bachelor's of Arts, in a degree from Cambridge in history. He then went on to do an MA and then a PhD. So he is Dr. Nicholas Campion. And this is an extremely impressive book, because he doesn't just give you the charts for all the countries. He explains why those charts are relevant to the country. And it may seem a crazy, crazy thing to say that countries have a chart, a birth chart, and I struggled with that for some time too, but they truly do. And what that means is every time the country has a new legal framework or a new constitution, they become a new entity, if you like. So, for instance, for the UK, there's a very old chart, which I don't think many astrologers use, but there's a May 1707 chart that was when England and Scotland became the UK. They unified in that particular act of union in May 1707 to become the UK as it was then. Then after that, 1st of January 1801, there was an act of union, 0 Hours London, if you want to look it up, another act of union that then included Ireland in the UK. Now, both charts resonate with transits. I principally use the 1801 chart, and I really like to work with charts for quite some years to check how they respond to transits, because thousands and thousands of astrologers are doing this all over the world with countries' charts, because you have to find where they're sensitive to be valid. For instance, the chart for America that I use, that I've tested to destruction, I think, is the 4th of July, 1776, 10 past 5 in the afternoon, Philadelphia, the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And I know there's another chart for a slightly different time for that, but I find that 10 past 5 in the afternoon incredibly reliable. And I've been following this for decades. For instance, just to give you an example, when we had 9/11, transiting Pluto was exactly to the degree on the ascendant of America. That's 12 degrees of Sagittarius, the ascendant. And I'm going to try and keep this as simple as I can. And the angles of the chart, in fact, in the entire clock face of any chart, shifts about a degree every 4 minutes. It varies according to season slightly, but that's a rough guide of thumb. So if you are looking at a different time, even a couple of hours later or earlier, the US would not have an ascendant of 12 degrees of Sagittarius. But it does for 10 past 5 in the afternoon, 4th of July, 1776, Philadelphia. And what happened then was obviously very dramatic, whatever went on at 9/11. And Sagittarius, of course, is to do with flight. And Pluto is something transformational and extremely dramatic, to do with life and death. And indeed, tragically, there were a huge number of deaths then of people who were, in the tower at that time, in the towers at that time. And it also brought about a transformation in how we fly, the rules and regulations about how we fly. So I think that's a very clear example. Just to give you an idea of how transits kind of test a chart and see if they're valid. Anyway, all of these. So I'm gonna come to Japan's chart that I'm working with in just a moment. And as I say, Heather and I have corresponded on this. Now, just to say, Ryo Tatsuki was talking about a major seismic event, essentially a seismic event that would produce a tsunami. Now, as I'm filming this on the 18th of July, you may well be aware, you can easily follow this on volcanodiscovery.com or USGS, that records all the seismic activity across the world. They both do. Since the solstice, the 21st of June, there have been over 2,000 earthquakes in Japan, over 2,000 earthquakes, but principally around the Tokara, Tokara Islands. This is the most significant seismic swarm for almost 30 years. Many people from those islands have been evacuated, and parts of Japan are on high alert because it is a very significant earthquake swarm. Now, some of the earthquakes have been quite small, Others have been up in the 5s and even the 6s. So recently there's been a 5.5, a 5.8. Yesterday I picked up one that was a 6 magnitude near a place called Nemuro, Nemuro, in Japan. That happened on the 17th of July. It doesn't seem to have registered on USGS yet or Volcano Discovery, but nevertheless they are popping off all the time. So let us look first at, so, you know, what I'm saying already, even before we go any deeper into any more detail, that with Ryo Tatsuki predicting some major seismic event in July 2025, we certainly already have a lot of evidence for that. You know, over 2,000 earthquakes in barely 4 weeks is very significant. That's the biggest swarm, as I say, earthquake swarm in about 30 years for Japan. So let us look at the chart firstly for Fukushima. And again, as I say, Ryo Tatsuki predicted this to the month, because it's very interesting. Okay, so this is exact to the day and the time when Fukushima occurred. And, you know, as you may remember, there was I think a 9.1 earthquake, massive earthquake. There was a huge tsunami. A lot of people were killed, and 3 of the 6 nuclear reactors at Fukushima were severely damaged. They went to kind of meltdown, and there was a lot of radiation that came from that affected not only the people in the area, but it went into the water as well. I mean, you probably remember this because it was very dramatic, because people were concerned it affected the waters across the world, and, you know, affected America's coast as well. And, you know, there's a lot of radioactivity that happened at that time. So let's look at the chart for this, because it's really interesting. So what do we think of when we think of earthquakes and seismic activity? Well, we think of the planet Uranus. You know, that is the principal planet that is linked to those sudden, shocking, eruptive seismic events. And here it's at the anaretic degree. How often have I been talking about anaretic degrees recently? The crisis degree of Pisces, which is water. So you literally have, because with Uranus and Pluto, those are the two planets that I associate with any kind of radioactivity. Think of uranium, think of plutonium. Now, there are many other associations, of course, with those 2 planets, but they both do have links to radioactive activity and nuclear events. So literally, radioactive water as a result of some seismic activity, just from that. This is within 3 minutes of 0 of Aries. So this is on the world axis as well. It's on the anaretic degree, the crisis degree of Pisces. It's also on the world axis. And we know, because of, you know, I've endlessly talked about this in recent months, the last couple of years really, that when planets are on the world axis, 0 of Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, you get events that are thrown onto the public stage in a bigger way. They're a bigger deal globally. Now, what is fascinating as well here is Neptune, which is the planet that rules Pisces, is also at the anaretic degree of Aquarius, ruled by Uranus. So here, if you know a little bit of astrology, these planets are actually what is called in mutual reception, because Neptune is in Uranus' sign that it rules, Aquarius, and Uranus is in Neptune's sign of Pisces, which it rules. So that's considered like a strong conjunction. So Neptune is also at this crisis degree, this anaretic degree of Aquarius. So again, we have big watery events potentially. Neptune can be linked to the seas. It is linked to the seas, the oceans, tsunamis. It can be linked to pollution or toxicity of some kind. And again, this could be linked to some sudden, shocking seismic event because it's Aquarius. And indeed, and the software hasn't picked it up, but actually this is in what's called a quindicile, 165 degrees to the ascendant of the moment of the event. Because 1555 of Leo was the constellation on the horizon at the very moment this happened in Fukushima. So you have some very clear messages here. The quindicile is about a huge upheaval of some kind. And with Uranus here, Uranus is also quindicile, again, huge upset, upheaval. You've got to keep quindiciles really tight, only a 2-degree orb either way. So it is quindicile Saturn, so breaking up old structures for sure. Saturn rules the 6th house of the event, the country here. And the 6th house is to do with health. In this particular event chart, it's to do with the health of the people. I think that's really clear. And also, Homere is here. It doesn't pick up the quindicile, it's about 1 degree off. But the very fact we have Homere here, which is to do in one aspect of its symbolism, as you know, in its fire goddess aspect, it was said by her daughter Pele to birth the 8 islands of Hawaii. So again, you get this eruptive force coming up from the sea. Fascinating. And just almost, you know, it's almost like a cosmic joke that at the time I'm talking about this, we have Mercury, planet of communication, at 2 degrees of Aries, exactly where transiting Saturn and Neptune are right now. You know, so I'm talking about this. The other thing I just want to mention here is that the moon here at the time of Fukushima, the moon representing the people, was at 0 degrees of Gemini. That is pretty much exactly where transiting Sedna and Uranus are right now. Transiting Sedna is to do with, again, the deep, deep seas and some kind of metamorphosis taking place, which is being ignited now by Uranus. And again, I've talked about that at great length in other videos and how it links with Richard Rudd's gene keys at this time. So I'll put the videos where I've done so many, but I'll put the big picture, Metamorphosis for Humanity, and the conversation with Richard Rudd below this video. So very often, when there are big events like this, the planets create a hot degree, if you like, a hot degree. And when subsequent transits happen in future, they pick up whatever the previous event was. So as I say, that Uranus transiting Sedna are at about 0 of Gemini right now, activating the moon at the time of Fukushima. And by the way, also Neptune and Saturn are very close. You know, they're conjunct 29 of Pisces. They're conjunct where Uranus was. The planet of earthquakes, radioactive activity, radioactive events, water at the time of Fukushima. I hope I'm making sense here and not compressing too much from the symbolism. And I hope I'm being clear. Okay, so that is the chart for Fukushima. So I'm going to stop sharing here. So in my discussions with Heather, I said that in checking out Nick Campion's book, the Book of World Horoscopes, my absolute go-to Bible, he had a different chart for Japan. And remember, there could be 2 or 3 charts for each. You know, if you look at France, it has several charts with every different republic. Every time there was a new legal or constitutional framework for the country, there was a different birth chart. So France has quite a few, and I haven't, to be honest, fully got to grips with which one really resonates for France, but that's another tangent. So let us look at the chart for Japan that Nick Campion has in his book, because this is fascinating. And I'm going to read you what he says in the book. 28th of April, 1952 at 22:30. So in this book, page 175, he said, this is the chart for the official restoration of Japanese independence and sovereignty at the moment that peace was declared between Japan and the USA. This event took place on 28th of April, 1952. So, and this is the time he gave for that event being announced. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but it is just amazing to me. It's fascinating that the ascendant for Japan, the country, as Nick Campion sees it, the modern chart, if you like, has the ascendant, the identity of the country on the world axis, 0 of Capricorn, on the world axis. I also find it fascinating that we have this grouping here of Pluto, Homere, the South Node. Now, the South Node, as you know, moves on fairly quickly. The Nodal Axis spends about 18 months in each sign, but Pluto and Homere are slow moving. Pluto has a 248-year orbit. Homere, I believe, has 283-year orbit, almost 300 years. So if you're born in the early 1950s, you would have a Pluto-Homere conjunction. And this just feels very potent, really, because, again, if you look at my big picture video or my Metamorphosis for Humanity video, Pluto is the planet of transformation. Again, it's the other planet linked to radioactivity, as I've just been speaking about. Homere is about a change of state, a metamorphosis, as is Sedna. And it just feels very prophetic that they are in the chart for Japan's sovereignty. And of course, this was also the seed point. The seed point, this conjunction of Pluto and Homere, was the seed point for what we have now as the square. Because Pluto by transit is now right at the beginning of Aquarius, and Homere by transit is right at the beginning of Scorpio. They're now in square. But the birth of the seed point for that current square between the transiting planets was in the early 1950s. So, also they are in Leo, and of course, you know, the Japanese royal family are extremely prominent in that country as part of the rulership. And this is the 8th house as well. I don't want to go into too much detail on that, but I think it's very interesting that they are in a trine to Venus, which is the midheaven ruler here, and also Sedna. And Sedna, you know, I've talked so much about as this change of state, these deep, deep seas. So Homere, Pluto, and Sedna, again, are all in aspect as they are right now. Neptune on the midheaven really speaks about Japan being a very watery nation. There are lots of islands that make up Japan. It's a big, big fishing nation. And of course, fish, literally fish, is one of the principal parts of the diet of the Japanese as well. So the other thing to pick up is that Jupiter here is on the anoretic degree, the crisis degree, 55 minutes of Aries. And that's going to be picked up in a little while when we look at the solar arc chart. So those are really just the things I want to pick up to share with you Japan's sovereignty. But of course, the world axis, as we'll see in a moment, is being very highly activated. right now with the current transits. So let us stop sharing that and look at yet another chart. So let us look at the solar arc chart. And I don't want to, go down too deep a rabbit hole with this, otherwise we'll be lost in the weeds. I use solar arcs a lot in my work. I believe they're stronger than transits, and that's what we're going to be looking at here. So with solar arcs, you take the original birth chart, or birth chart of Japan in this case, and that ticks round as a secondary ring with everything moving at the same pace. The angles, the planets, etc. So they're not following their normal orbital speed. They are all clicking round at exactly the same pace. So it's like the natal chart is being moved on by about a degree a year. Not exactly, but about. So you can't just for your own birth chart say, okay, I'm 40 years old, I'm going to move my natal chart around by 40 degrees, because you will be very likely to have an accumulating error. Because depending on the month you were born, your particular solar arc may only be 58 minutes of a degree, or it may be 1 minute and 1 degree and 2 minutes. So you will have an accumulating error. And I don't want to kind of start teaching solar arcs in the middle of it, but just to give you an idea. Okay, so this is really fascinating. And I've set this for the 25th of July, because that is when we have the new moon in Leo. And so I've set, so it happens in US and Europe on the 24th of July, but in Japan, because it's so far east, it happens on the 25th. And it happens at 4:11 Japan time. So these are not transits that we're looking at, they're solar arcs. And it would have been too complicated to put a third ring of transits, but what I have picked up are transits that I think are important to talk about here. Okay, so first point to make, isn't it, well, if we just think about the new moon, actually, before I go any further, the new moon, which I haven't put in, is happening at 2 degrees of Leo. So it's about here, the transiting new moon. So that will be quincunx, 150 degrees approximately, to the ascendant. It will also be square, an out of sign square to Jupiter, and an in sign square to the sun, that new moon. Okay, so it's picking up some aspects. So let's go back to the solar arcs. What I find remarkable, given they only move a degree a year roughly, is that solar arc Neptune, to do with the seas, the oceans, etc., tsunamis, and the midheaven are both now at 0 degrees of Capricorn. They are exactly conjunct the ascendant of the chart of Japan's sovereignty. In fact, the midheaven is conjuncted to the very minute. And I found that really interesting. Now, in a person's chart, if you have solar arc midheaven conjunct the ascendant, you have to be quite well on in your life for that to happen. But there's a sense of great identity awareness, or your identity is projected into the world in some way. So for a country, this could be that something newsworthy is happening at this time that could well be connected to water, the seas, tsunamis, that kind of thing. We also have exact to the degree, and solar arcs only work if it's exact to the degree, no orbs. You only have an orb of minutes, not degrees. So solar arcs work, they operate over about a 9-month period, I would say, of 6 months applying to the natal aspects, and then 3 months waning. So it's about a 9-month transit. The closer they come to exactitude, the more likely you are to have a manifestation of the symbolism. But they have to be exact really to the degree, or within minutes of that. So we have Jupiter, solar arc Jupiter, 10 of Cancer, exactly by degree conjunct Uranus. Now, what's Uranus about? Uranus is the planet of earthquakes, seismic activity, radioactivity, that kind of thing. Jupiter expands. So the symbolism here is Jupiter is expanding the seismic potential for Japan at this time, round about the time of late July. It will continue, actually. It becomes absolutely exact, or let me see, in a few months' time, but nevertheless it is very strong because it's applying. By transit, you may be aware that Jupiter is also in Cancer right now. Jupiter is expanding water. And my goodness gracious, we're seeing some horrendous flooding around the world. I just picked up today, there's huge flooding in South Korea, also in Pakistan. We've had flooding in Spain. Recently, we've had terrible flooding in the US, in, oh my goodness, Texas. You know, and these flash floods come in and are just really devastating. So we've got transiting Jupiter in Cancer, as well as for Japan, solar arc in Cancer. Also, something else I wanted to pick up as well, but I'll come to that. Yeah, I'll come to that in a moment. We have solar arc Pluto at the anaretic degree, 29 of Libra, exactly opposing natal, let's call it, Jupiter at the anaretic degree of 29 of Aries. Remember, I just talked about that in the previous chart. So this is some kind of strong force potentially happening, both at the anaretic degree, some kind of strong force, and Aries, of course, is to do with some kind of primal fire, some fire event potentially. And again, I'm not predicting anything here. I'm just observing what's going on that is powerful in Japan's chart right now. Because, as I say, the seismic activity is already extraordinary for Japan. What is interesting, of course, is Uranus. We've just seen the chart for Fukushima. Uranus was literally within 3 minutes of zero of Aries. When it was at zero of Aries at Fukushima, it was down at the base of the chart. Think of something erupting, exploding, exactly square the ascendant descendant for Japan. Now, where you have aspects to the angles of a chart, or any mundane astrology, an event, where you have current, or in this case I'm talking about Fukushima's event, you're talking about the transits or the solar arcs that are aspecting the angles of a chart, of a country. Then you have potency. Angularity gives potency. We're talking about the world axis here. Uranus was on the world axis at Fukushima, very clearly. And here we have Neptune and midheaven coming exactly to the ascendant for Japan, sovereignty, also on the world axis. And of course, as I've talked at great length, we have transiting Saturn and Neptune right now. They're exactly at 2 degrees, that is still on the world axis. Saturn on the 13th of this month, July, has already started to retrograde, and they will be crossing back over through the retrograde zero of Aries in the coming months, crisscrossing again when they move direct. And although Saturn retrogrades back to 25 of Pisces, Uranus doesn't move away from that world axis point if you take 28 of the mutables to 2 degrees of the cardinals until next April-May time. So Neptune is squaring this ascendant-descendant axis of Japan in this particular chart until next April, May. All of this is very powerful because of its angularity and because they're on the world axis. Just looking down the timeline, on the 9th of August, which is the Aquarius full moon, that is when Mars has just moved into zero of Libra. So from the other side of the chart, if you like, not only is it opposing directly Saturn-Neptune, I'll talk about that in the next update video, but it is also squaring the ascendant-descendant axis of the Japan sovereignty chart. If I look a little further down the timeline to the solar eclipse happening on the 21st of September this year, that's at 29 of Virgo. So it is literally within less than a degree of zero of Libra on the world axis. So it is absolutely already at 29 of Virgo on the world axis, squaring the ascendant-descendant of this particular chart, which I believe is the current chart for Japan. Although, you know, Heather went into great detail on her insights, as did Stefan, and clearly that old 1457 chart for Japan very much still resonates. Because they do, you know, old charts for countries still resonate. By the way, I haven't mentioned in Ryo Tatsuki's prophecy, she talked about the two dragons. Now, if you look at Stefan's video where he shares Heather's chart for I think it was April or May 1457, the nodal axis is directly across the ascendant-descendant of that chart. The south node is conjunct the ascendant in that 1457 chart, and the north node is conjunct the descendant. What are they also known as, the south node and the north node? The dragon's tail and the dragon's head. So the dragon's tail is conjunct the ascendant of Japan in that 1457 chart, and the dragon's head is conjunct the descendant. Is that part of the meaning of what Ryo Tatsuki was talking about, perhaps? I don't know. I just think it's a very interesting correlation. The other thing I want to say right now is that with Neptune, I may stop sharing here, I think. Yeah. Okay, I'll stop sharing here. The other thing I want to say is, and I've talked about this again in previous videos, with Neptune at zero of Aries or close to, yes, it's activating primal fire. We've seen so many fires across the world, you know, been huge fires, again, California, in Turkey, in Spain, in Portugal, I think some in southern France. You know, there've been, by the way, huge floods also in China. I didn't mention 80,000 people evacuated because there was so much flooding. So Neptune at that world point of zero of Aries isn't just activating fire, primal fire. Because it's Neptune, it is also activating everything to do with water. Seas, the oceans, flooding, and tsunamis. Because Neptune is on the world axis. It may be in primal fire, but it's still itself on the world axis. I hope I'm making sense here. So that's why we are seeing astrologically not only fires but floods as well. You know, if you look to what's been happening in terms of seismic activity as well, with Uranus having just entered Gemini, you know, Mount Rainier, there's, you know, been a lot of seismic activity. There have been huge volcanoes, 2 large volcanoes going off in Indonesia, Mount Etna, Kilauea. We've even had a seismic swarm I heard about today in Naples, a very densely populated city in Italy. You know, and the astrology was anticipating this increased seismic activity because not only I've been talking about it, but other people have too. Now, as I say, I'm not predicting anything, but it's just been fascinating for me to go on a bit of a deep dive down a rabbit hole to draw up these astrological correlations for you. We are going to continue to see seismic activity this year because Gaia is going through her own rebirth and upgrade. We are going to continue to see, sadly, extreme weather. Some of this is natural. Some of this is unnatural. Partly it's because the Earth has never been more electrified than it is at the moment, with all the satellites that are beaming down a huge amount of electrification to the Earth. That is affecting not only Gaia herself, but we are, of course, electromagnetic beings. It's affecting our physicality as well. This is unprecedented. We have never had this degree of electrification on the Earth before. Nobody knows what the effects and the result of that are going to be. And there are other forms of aspects that affect the weather that you are all well aware of, I'm sure. So although this has been a little more technical, I hope enough of you have kind of hung on through this, because I do find it absolutely fascinating to see what may unfold for Japan. Of course, many other countries may also have their angles on the world axis. I haven't explored those fully yet because there are hundreds of countries, hundreds, and you're just sort of sifting through the yellow pages almost to find those. But I hope that what I've shared has been of interest to you. And let's just stay on our eagle's perch and, very importantly, send peace, send calm, send love in each of our meditations, whether it's daily time or evening time. Just see everything across the Earth just settling down in this calming, gentle, pale blue light. That is the best thing we can do across the world, thousands of us coming together when we all think, what can we do to help? Well, we can all do that for free every day, several times a day if you like. But if you try and coordinate with the time of 7 p.m. UK time, or if you're in New Zealand or Australia where it's too difficult to set the intention, you're linking to the group energy, because it's the group energy that magnifies our intention. God bless. Well done if you've hung on till the end. I'll be back very soon. Bye for now.